There are so many licenses that have made their way into Dead by Daylight, so much so that no game could ever rival its success in the asymmetrical horror genre, with tons of licensed killers such as Chucky from Child's Play, Michael Myers from Halloween, and even killers from iconic horror games like Pyramid Head from Silent Hill and Nemesis from Resident Evil. But there are still some iconic licenses that have yet to make their way into the game, and in today's video we'll take a look at 10 licenses that have yet to show their face in Dead by Daylight and discuss why I think they'd work. So let me know in the comments down below what chapters you think would work best and what chapters you would also like to see in Dead by Daylight. Starting off with the first chapter that I'd like to see added to the game, and that chapter is It/Pennywise. I'm still really surprised that the It franchise, created by Stephen King, has yet to appear in Dead by Daylight. There is so much potential for this character to be added as a killer, followed by members of the Loser Club also being survivors. Many people will say how we already have a clown killer in the game, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't also have Pennywise. We already have the hillbilly who was originally meant to be Leatherface before Behavior obtained the license for the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Pennywise is also no ordinary clown. Despite taking the form of one, Pennywise is in fact a shape-shifting ancient entity that preys upon the town of Derry every 27 years. His powers would be vastly different to that of the clown. He is after all a powerful being that is able to change reality and transform into people. His powers could feature things like hallucinations of generators, or making survivors see other survivors who aren't actually real and are in fact Pennywise transformed. I'm not too sure how all of this would work, of course, but there is definitely a lot of potential for Pennywise to pop up in Dead by Daylight. Maybe we could also see a sewer map surrounded by his iconic red balloons, with Easter eggs hidden amongst the map that we could also find. We could have the adult versions of the Loser Club from the movies, with something like they did from the new chapter having multiple survivors in one, or even just one originally, then offer more as legendary skins on the store. Even if Behavior couldn't obtain the licenses for the actors and actresses, they could make their own versions of the Loser Club and have their own original survivors. There's definitely a lot they could do with a Pennywise/It chapter, and it's one that I think would do incredibly well as an addition to the game. And it is also a chapter that I think a lot of you and myself would love to have in Dead by Daylight. Friday the 13th is easily one of the most iconic horror and slasher franchises of all time, and is one that we've yet to see in Dead by Daylight. There have been a lot of complications surrounding the Friday the 13th franchise, such as lawsuits, which has to be the main reason as to why we haven't yet had a Friday the 13th chapter. Friday the 13th was originally released back in 1980 and has a total of 12 different movies, including 9 sequels, a remake which was released in 2009, as well as a spin-off movie, Freddy vs. Jason. Before the lawsuit, there was also a Friday the 13th game, which was originally released on Steam, then later on the PS4 and Xbox One, and even eventually came to the Nintendo Switch. The Friday the 13th game is actually the main reason that I started playing Dead by Daylight in the first place, as at the time I was looking for other games that were similar. Despite having a roadmap and tons of new content planned, in 2018 the developers could no longer add any new content to the game due to the lawsuit, meaning the game slowly died out in popularity. It was brought up in 2022 that the lawsuit had been resolved, meaning new pieces of media surrounding the Friday the 13th franchise could be released. However, there have been recent reports that suggest the lawsuit isn't yet fully resolved, and the lawsuit surrounding the Friday the 13th franchise is confusing and uncertain at best. But with the Jason character recently being added to the multiverse game and potentially Fortnite, it's definitely a possibility that we could see a Friday the 13th chapter in Dead by Daylight sooner rather than later. Providing Behavior acquired the licenses, the Friday the 13th chapter in Dead by Daylight could be a full chapter, featuring a killer, a survivor, and also a map. The map would definitely have to be the iconic Camp Crystal Lake, with multiple cabins around the map, including windows and pallets that the survivors can utilize to evade the killer. The survivor in this chapter would also have to be Tommy Jarvis from Friday the 13th Part 6, Jason Lives, as he is easily the most iconic and most popular survivor from the Friday the 13th movies. Obviously the killer for this chapter would be Jason, but which version of Jason do you guys think they should add into the game as the default skin? In my opinion, it should be Friday the 13th Part 3 Jason, as this is the very first time we see him with his iconic hockey mask. Or even Part 6 Jason Lives to match the Tommy Jarvis as a survivor. They could also add different Jasons to the store as legendary skins, giving him different representations from all of the different movies. I think that Jason's power would be multiple mini powers into one, somewhat similar to the pig. He could have a teleport ability as well as a stealth ability that he gains passively, going on cooldown after each use. He could also have a rage ability that he can build up where he can insta-down survivors. This could be somewhat similar to Myers and the owner. But with all of that said, Friday the 13th is definitely the franchise I would most like to see in Dead by Daylight. Do you guys agree? And if not, which is the franchise that you would most like to see added to Dead by Daylight? Originally released back in 1988, Predator, much like Friday the 13th, is another franchise that has a ton of different movies and video games, including an asymmetrical multiplayer game, Predator Hunting Grounds. Ever since the Alien chapter was released in Dead by Daylight, fans have speculated about a potential Predator chapter following in the near future. I definitely agree that a Predator chapter is an absolute must for DBD, and not only is it one of the more iconic franchises that we don't yet have in the game, but also, as previously mentioned, the Predator franchise goes hand in hand with the Alien franchise. With the countless Alien vs Predator movies and video games that we have available, we definitely can't have one without the other. With this chapter, there would be many different killers and survivors that they could choose to add to the game. However, I would definitely like to see the original Predator from the very first movie. They could also give us multiple different skins on the store, allowing players to choose their favorite Predator species. We could even have a legendary skin that would give us an unmasked jungle hunter Predator. And sticking with the theme of the original movie, I would definitely love to see Dutch added as a survivor. If this was the case, the map should also definitely be a jungle themed map, with almost the entirety of the original movie taking place in the jungle. The Bioshock series has to be one of the most iconic survival horror games in its genre, with the first game releasing all the way back in 2007, the second game in 2010, and finally the third game, Bioshock Infinite, releasing in 2013. Each playable character in the Bioshock games have their own story, the first of which follows a man called Jack, who is the only survivor from a plane crash that crashes into the Atlantic Ocean. Playing as Jack, you navigate your way through the hell that is Rapture, only to learn the tragic truth as to why he's there in the first place. The second game features the character Subject Delta, who, because of their bond with their little sister called Eleanor, must go on a mission to find her or else he will die. And finally, the third game in the series, Bioshock Infinite, which tells the story of Booker DeWitt, who is told by the Lutis twins that he must bring them the girl to wipe away his debt, which in turn takes us on a journey of Booker trying to find the girl called Elizabeth. Each game has a great way of getting you hooked into the story and features a lot of dark, twisted themes throughout them. If Behavior ever did obtain the license for Bioshock, I think for certain that our main survivor would be Elizabeth. Her story is one that really hooks you in and takes you back to where it all began, Rapture. And for the killer, I think that the big daddies that we see throughout the series could be a possible choice. These huge lumbering metal beings are genetically enhanced humans who have had their skin and organs grafted into a diving suit. They get extremely hostile towards the player if they attempt to harm them or their little sisters. Finally, to round the whole chapter out, if we were to see a map, we would potentially see Rapture, since this is the most iconic place in all of the games. With these three choices, we would somewhat cover all the games that the Bioshock series has to offer, and it's a license that I know many of you would love to have in Dead by Daylight. Another great license we have yet to see is a chapter from the Conjuring Universe. The first movie was released back in 2013 and followed the story of real-life demonologists Ed and Lorraine Warren, who attempt to help a poor family rid their house of dark forces. The Conjuring was a hit and so far would span 8 movies in its universe, and at the time of recording this video, the most recent of which is The Nun 2. The best part about The Conjuring is that it's based on a true story of a couple who try to aid those attacked by evil entities, and since there's so many different spirits that present themselves throughout the movies, there's a lot of choice for who they would choose in terms of a killer from a Conjuring theme chapter. If Behavior somehow managed to attain the license for the Conjuring Universe, I think that the nun that first appears in Conjuring 2 should be the killer. Not only would this be an iconic franchise to bring to the game, but along with it, it would also bring the scare factor back to Dead by Daylight. This killer is a truly evil and demonic creature that takes the form of a nun, as it terrorizes people, and therefore would make an incredibly scary addition to our current killer roster. Maybe the powers could include flying towards survivors or knocking survivors to the ground. I'm uncertain exactly how the nun's power would work without making them too similar to the nurse, but the nun is definitely my choice for the killer, and let me know if you guys also agree with that. And if you do agree that they should add the nun to the game, let me know what you guys think her power should be without making it too similar to the nurse. Now for the survivor part of the chapter, I do think the most obvious choice is Ed and Lorraine themselves. Even though I think Ed and Lorraine are the most popular choice, the fact that they are actually real life people could cause some kind of complications for Behavior to obtain the license. But either way, whatever Behavior would choose to appear in Dead by Daylight from the Conjuring Universe would definitely be a love chapter by myself and the majority of the DBD community. The Walking Dead first took to our screens back in 2010, and since then the story of the survivors and their survival through a zombie-infested world was told over the course of 11 seasons, 6 spin-off shows, 2 web shows that were featured on AMC, 6 Telltale games, mobile games, and a whole lot more, all of which were based on Robert Kirkman's comic series of the same name. It was easily one of the most popular shows in the world and featured a wide cast of characters that people would soon come to love. The most iconic character of all, however, would be Rick Grimes, who the original comics focused on. The story story of Rick Grimes begins with him waking up in a coma 4 weeks after a zombie outbreak has taken over the US. Alone, confused and unsure of what to do, Rick set out to find his family and make sure they were safe. His story spans across many different forms of media, from comics to video games. Rick would also learn that the living dead was not the only problem he would face in this world. So if The Walking Dead ever does come to Dead by Daylight, I think the most obvious choice for the survivor would be Rick Grimes. He also went through so much in his story that it changes the very person that he became. However, if they were to have more than one survivor, I think that having Michonne, Maggie or Daryl appear alongside Rick would be perfect, as these were also huge staples of the show in video games. Even though the infected would be the biggest concern that these characters face, they also had trouble with more dangerous survivors such as the Governor, Negan and the Alpha. Any of these characters would be a perfect fit for a killer, as they were all deeply twisted and disturbed in their own way. I think, however, the most popular choice would be Negan. The Walking Dead would be a huge addition to Dead by Daylight and would also bring in many fans of the franchise as new players to the game. This next license is one of the most sought after licenses that the Dead by Daylight community have been asking for, and that is Five Nights at Freddy's. Five Nights at Freddy's began its success back in 2014, and the game followed a night security guard who was tasked with the easy job of keeping an eye on the animatronics in a family pizza restaurant. What sounds like an incredibly easy job is later revealed to be a challenging mission of survival, as the animatronics try and hunt you down and stuff your body into an empty animatronic suit. You as the guard were tasked with watching the CCTV cameras and locking your doors to avoid the threats that lurked in the building, desperately trying to survive until 6 AM. Five Nights at Freddy's quickly rose in popularity and would so far span 8 games that would fill us in on the extensive lore behind the game, and also 5 spin-off games. The popularity would also lead to a movie being released in 2023 and a future sequel to the movie potentially releasing in 2025. So it's safe to say that Five Nights at Freddy's, a unique take on a horror story, would definitely be a perfect fit for Dead by Daylight. I'm not too sure who would be a potential survivor if they did somehow obtain the license for Five Nights at Freddy's. You guys can let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. However, for the killer, I think there's a pretty obvious answer, and that would be the character Springtrap. If you're unaware of who Springtrap is, he is a yellow animatronic possessed by a deeply disturbed man, and he is one of the main villains in the Five Nights at Freddy's series. I won't go into too much detail about the lore just to keep this video spoiler free, but I do think Springtrap as the killer would make for a great chapter, or at least a great paragraph for Dead by Daylight. If they were to go with a full chapter, maybe an abandoned filthy pizzeria included as a map, riddled with Easter eggs pointing towards the original games, would be a really good fit for DBD. Also, be sure to let me know what you guys think of a potential Five Nights at Freddy's chapter down below in the comments. Another franchise that I think would be a great addition to Dead by Daylight is Terminator. In the earlier days of Dead by Daylight, there was much less variety, and an argument could be made that the Terminator franchise wouldn't fit in the game due to it mostly being in the action and sci-fi genre. However, in recent years, we've seen more diverse chapters, some of which have somewhat stepped away from the original horror and slasher genre. So with that in mind, I think Terminator would be a perfect fit. They could either do a full chapter featuring a survivor, a killer, and potentially even a map, or if they just acquired the Terminator license alone and no license for the actors and actresses in the movies, they could just go with a paragraph chapter with only the killer. And if this was the case, they could easily go with the T-800 endoskeleton. But obviously it would be preferred if they could acquire the licensing for the actors as well as just the franchise. If this was the case, we could have a few different options for the killer. They could either go with the T-800 from the first movie, or even the T-1000 from the second movie. I definitely think they should stick to the original 2 movies released, as these were by far the most popular, with many fans not holding the later movies in the same regard as the original 2. And for the survivors, they could go with either Sarah Connor from the original first 2 movies, or Kyle Reese from the very first movie, both of which would make great additions to the roster of licensed survivors in DBD. I'm also curious to see what you guys think about a potential Terminator chapter in DBD. Would it fit right in, or do you think it would be too out of place? Let me know in the comments down below. Another game license that I personally feel would fit perfectly into the ever-growing horror universe that is Dead by Daylight is The Evil Within. This first game released back in 2014 and allowed players to experience horror through the eyes of the detective Sebastian Castellanos, as he is roped into a world of nightmarish locations and disgustingly horrid creatures whilst trying to solve a mass murder at Beacon Mental Hospital, fighting for survival through this hellish universe, alongside his partner Joseph Oda, a police officer called Oscar Colony, and a junior detective Julie Kidman, with DLC that further expanded the descent into madness that is Evil Within, as well as a sequel that also released in 2017. The Evil Within series would be a great addition to Dead by Daylight. Perhaps we could have our main survivor, Sebastian Castellanos, with legendary outfits allowing us to play as Julie, Joseph, and Oscar. Or maybe we could have something like the Resident Evil chapters that gave us 2 survivors instead of 1. And as for who the killer should be, the blatantly obvious choice would be Ruvik. Ruvik is sort of the overseer of the world that the 4 unfortunate survivors are pulled into, and even though they have nothing to do with Ruvik's original plan, he later decides that he wants to use Sebastian for his own selfish means. I'm uncertain about what powers Ruvik could have in Dead by Daylight, or what survivors they would choose, but I am sure that the evil within would be a welcome chapter to the Dead by Daylight roster. The final franchise that I myself would love to see make an appearance in Dead by Daylight would be the 2008 horror mystery movie, The Strangers. It would later be followed up by a sequel, The Strangers Prey at Night, that would release in 2018, and more recently a new movie with the title The Strangers Chapter 1, as a way of rebooting the franchise. The Strangers is a favourite of mine, and the first movie tells us the story of a couple, James and Kirsten, as they return home to James's childhood summer home after a wedding. Shortly after, there's a knock on the door that disturbs them, and as they answer, they are greeted by a young woman who asks if Tamara is home. They quickly dismiss her, explaining that she's got the wrong house, but unknowingly to the couple, they would later see her again, this time followed by two others, a man and another girl, all of which are wearing masks to obscure their faces. Soon, both James and Kirsten would be forced into a fight for survival against the group. The second movie is also similar, but features new victims of the slasher group. The Strangers, also known as Man in Mask, Dollface, and Pin-Up Girl, would make great killer additions to Dead by Daylight, maybe with the ability to switch between each one and experience a different power. The map could also feature the childhood home that we seen in the first Strangers movie, or maybe a trailer park, which is the location in the second film. Though this is a license that myself and many others would love to see in Dead by Daylight, I do think it is on the more unlikely side of chapter additions, but since there's a new movie that has just been released at the time of recording this video, we could potentially see a future Strangers chapter in Dead by Daylight. So that is my list for 10 licensed chapters that I would love to see added to the game. Feel free to let me know in the comments down below any potential chapters that I have missed out in this video, and feel free to let me know 10 chapters that you would also love to see added to Dead by Daylight.